Hello, it's Daniel Dauphin with Dauphin Horsemanship, and we're here today to kind of answer a viewer's question, and it's a pretty common line of questions that I get with regard to the bit videos, and that is about good mouth habits and signs of vice or rejection of the bit. I think the specific question that I had gotten was about bits and causing pain, and whether bits necessarily cause pain because of the nerve wiring of the horse and the amount of nerves that they have in their mouth. And so I'm going to go over some general factors here at first, and then I have some specific signs and body language cues that I would be looking for the horse to be telling me that there are some problems here that I need to investigate, and also some signs that'll tell me that everything is good here. So in general, and with regard to these signs I'm going to outline later, what we want to look for is a clear pattern. So any particular one of these signs that you see does not indicate a bit problem necessarily. It could be indicative of a different problem entirely. We're looking for a pattern in which the bit is the one thing that everything has in common. When I find that, I know I have a bit problem. If I find, like the first sign is going to be about bridling and unbridling, if I have a horse that all of a sudden is hard to bridle, that could indicate that he's anticipating a problem with the bit. It could also indicate that he's got a tick in his right ear. So, a single point does not make a straight line. You need kind of a confluence of evidence here to prove that the bit is in fact the problem. Another thing that I want to point out is that with horses, we're reading body language and all. Horses are literal. They do not hide emotions. They are not sarcastic. What you read in a horse, what these patterns show, is literal information. People tend to have a problem with that. They tend to have these assumptions, and oh, my baby, he just loves this, and I'm going, well, there's three things going on here that tell me that he does not love this at all. He in fact doesn't like this at all, and his description is literal. Yours is a romanticized emotional thing that you've got going on. So the horse's literal evidence is way more important to me than your particular feelings about something. The other general thing that I want to talk about is dogma. A fair bit of what I'm talking about in these bit videos excuse me, does go against conventional practice, or at least within certain sectors of the horse world. For instance, one of those is about dropping a bit down in a horse's mouth, and I'm not going to rehash everything that we've done in the other videos. We've got probably 4 hours worth of stuff out there on YouTube right now, and in blogs I've got even more on the subscriber side of the website. So please watch that stuff before you ask me a question, because there's a lot of information that I've already explained in depth out there. But with regard to dropping a bit down in a horse's mouth, that's clearly a dogmatic thing to me. And what dogma is an authority figure that tells you something that can't be questioned. And so I haven't found the root of it. I do continue to search for it, but I believe that some very well-known instructor 100 years ago taught all of his students to put the bit here and don't question me on it, just do it, and they move forward. And then they taught their students, and then they taught their students, and they taught their students. I ask, I question people. I have never found a person who rides with the bit that way that explains to me, that can give me a good reason why. They always just say, well, that's how I was taught to do it. Well, horses tell me differently. They tell me that that's not something that they like. And again, I'll take the horse's literal interpretation over this dogmatic thing that you can explain to me. A couple of the points that I'm going to just kind of ask you to accept, but again, part of the body language thing of what makes sense. We're going to talk a lot about salivation down here in the signs. which is mouth-watering, the saliva, spit. So here's a key principle that we're going to need to kind of take here, and that is that a salivating horse should also be a swallowing horse. And again, I'll talk about that a lot more in a few minutes. But if I were standing here talking to you on camera and all of a sudden I had a line of drool come down, what that tells you is that I didn't use my tongue inside my mouth to gather that spit and then swallow it. An excess came out and it leaked. The same mechanism happens with horses, and it's not normal and it's not good. A salivating horse should be a swallowing horse. Kind of the chain that's going to lead to. A horse that is relaxed will have a relaxed tongue, and we're going to discuss a lot on the tongue. If they have that relaxed tongue, they are going to be swallowing. If they are swallowing, they will have a relaxed jaw. If they have a relaxed jaw, they will have a relaxed poll and a relaxed neck. The opposite of that would be a TMJ type of a situation with which both people and horses can get. So when you have that tension and these muscles are locked in your jaw, you're not relaxed. And in people that have TMJ problem, they're gonna start getting headaches and they're gonna have a very stiff neck. And that same mechanism occurs in the horse. When they've got that locked jaw situation, they're not going to be swallowing, they're not going to be relaxed in the poll, they're not going to be relaxed through their neck, and that tension is going to just telescope throughout the horse's entire body. One of the other things with regard to the mouth, and we'll talk a lot about the rider's hands here in a minute, is that a horse has a sense of touch about 6 times more sensitive than the human sense of touch. And as this lady had asked in her question, the tongue has a phenomenal amount of nerves in it. And so if you think about how dexterous the tongue on a horse is when he's grazing, he can go grab a mouthful of grass over there and maybe it contained whatever type of forage he was trying to eat, but it also had a weed in it, and he can with his tongue sift through that and get the weed out and then swallow the blades of grass and chew them up that he wanted. Their tongue is an organ, it's a muscle. It is very, very dexterous. It is capable of a lot of sensory communication, which is one reason why it's such a valuable thing for us to use when we communicate with the horse. But because it is so sensitive, it is also easy to overload. And we'll talk about this, but a lot of people, with the way that they use their reins, it's like they're yelling at the horse all the time. And before long, he's just going to have sensory overload and withdraw that tongue to take that sensitive organ out of the equation. He's going to put you on the bars, and now we have a hard-mouthed horse that is he has numbed himself because of the way that you're using your hand. And again, as I've said in other videos, that's not a bit issue, that's a rider issue. It doesn't matter what type of a bridle you use. If you have really poor hands, he's going to be starting to evade them in some way, shape, or form. So taking a rider that has hands like that and putting them in a bitless bridle is not going to solve the problem. We're just now numbing different pressure points around the horse. And working on the hands is the solution there. Changing the mechanics of things isn't. Okay, so now the actual signs that I would be looking for in a horse that are going to tell me whether he is comfortable or uncomfortable. The first part I'll say deals with bridling and unbridling. And I'm going to use colts as kind of an example here. So I think all of us have seen a video, or if you haven't, look one up, but of a colt when we first put the bit in their mouth, and they will just mouth on that thing usually for 10 to 20, maybe even 30 minutes until they kind of figure out how to pack it around. And I have a little snaffle bit on a thong, just a little leather thong that I put on colts, and when I'm doing groundwork and working in the round pen, I let them just pack that thing around so they can sort of work all of that out and learn to pack that bit. And my hands aren't a part of that equation. They get to do that for 2 or 3 days without it ever really being pulled on or anything. So again, when I'm first bridling a colt, he doesn't know how to take that bit. He's not comfortable with that situation, and you can't expect him to have his head in a perfect position. I would fully expect a colt to be, you know, getting way up here and all of that stuff. But once we're past that, once he knows where to keep his head and he's comfortable with the bit, let's say that I've got a horse that's an 8-year-old and been riding a long time, and all of a sudden I change bits, and 2 or 3 days later he's hard to bridle. That could be an indication that he's not liking this bit. He's anticipating something going on that he doesn't like there. Sort of the flip side of that would be the unbridling. And so it's pretty common with the colts that I'm starting that a couple of weeks into the deal, as I go to unbridle them one day, I pull the headstall off and the horse doesn't spit the bit out. He just stands there kind of sucking on it and holding it just like I would like, and I'll let that go. That's a very good day as far as I'm concerned, because it tells me how comfortable that colt is with that bit, and the majority of them do this. So as I unbridle them from that point forward, I'm going to give them 30-45 seconds to hold it, and I'll then put my thumb in their mouth just like I would do when I'm bridling them, to have them open the mouth, and then I'll drop the bit out. And again, with our pattern, horse could be hard to bridle because there's a tick in the ear. He could be hard to bridle because when you bridle him, you do it in a bad way, and you whack him in the teeth with the bit. And again, that's not a bit issue. That is a horsemanship issue. That's the person not bridling the horse in a proper way, and that's not his fault. It's your fault. That's a handling issue. We'll do a separate video down the road on my version of the proper way to bridle a horse. So one of the other signs is going to be just a typical nervous mouth in the horse. So again, if we look at that colt that's had a bit put in his mouth for the first time, he's going to be just kind of mouthing on that bit constantly. He's going to put his tongue over the top of it. He's going to just be looking for the way to hold that bit comfortably. And we can see those same signs in older horses that are being ridden. And so if I see a horse that is mouthing a bit a lot, or gapping their mouth open, or withdrawing the tongue, or any of those things, that is what I call a nervous mouth. I don't want to see that. That's a red flag to me, and generally that is going to be indicative of a bit or a rider's hands issue. Not always. I have seen horses that had some pain in their body somewhere that was unrelated to the mouth, and they were simply expressing it in the mouth. I've even seen a horse that was sore in his hocks, and he was expressing that pain in his mouth. So most of the time when we see that, it's a bit problem, but not always. So again, I'm looking for, multiple points lining up into a straight line, not just one particular point. There are other horses that I've seen, and I can think of some particular bloodlines. Sorry, I'm trying not to, I've got a lot to say here, but I'm trying to keep it at a reasonable length. So I can think of some particular bloodlines that tend to be a little more nervous and a little more antsy, and they're going to be more prone to have a nervous mouth. There are other bloodlines that I can think of that are real easy to turn into tail swishers with your feet. If you get too aggressive with your legs, you can aggravate them real easy, and they tend to express that. Handlebar dock would be one of those old bloodlines. You can turn those things into tail swishers easy. So a nervous mouth might just kind of be the way that horse is. It might not really be indicative that something bad is going on or that we really need to change things. Those are the types of horses that I will use pacifying bits on. So pacifying bits are the ones that have rollers and things like that, and it gives that horse something to play with and kind of self-soothe and pacify himself. Just like you or I might go for a job interview or something that would tend to make you nervous, and you get some gum, and it gives you something when you're sitting in that waiting room and you're jittery and antsy. It gives you something to do to kind of let that energy loose until you get to go on the interview or see the doctor or whatever the deal is. I don't like to put those type of bits on horses that don't have that problem, because I have seen a few horses that had a nice, quiet, passive mouth, and we gave them something to play with, and now they need something to play with. And so to my mind, I've kind of created a monster there when I start that. So I don't put doodads in a horse's mouth to play with if he doesn't need doodads to play with. That's just me. Some people are going to put a cricket or a roller or something in every horse's mouth, and I mean, that's fine. And if you're always going to ride with that, that's just part of your style and your deal, and I'm cool with that. But I would rather be able to stay as simple as I can possibly stay until I have a reason to add things to the equation. Just my particular way of doing things. The opposite of the nervous mouth, what I really want to see a horse doing is picking up and holding the bit and being very, very passive with it. That is showing me comfort in that horse's mouth. And I'm not saying I don't want to ever see a move. They need to swallow occasionally. And that's a good thing. As we said, that leads to the relaxed tongue, the relaxed jaw, the relaxed poll, the relaxed neck. That's all good. But by and large, a horse should be packing a bit and should have what I'll refer to as a mouth seal. So I've said in other videos, but if you just sit here and close your mouth, you'll swallow when you do it. You'll notice that your tongue is filling the roof of the mouth, so your tongue is touching and in contact with your palate. And you are also sucking a little bit, which keeps your lips closed. A horse is going to do the exact same thing when he gets comfortable with the bit. So if I am if I'm seeing a horse here like that doesn't have a nice clean mouth, he is maybe salivating outside of his mouth, that tells me that his tongue isn't loose, he's not working it, he's not swallowing, and his mouth seal's getting broken and leaking saliva. One of the things that can contribute to that is a bit. Like, I've never been a fan of these big rubber plug bits that are like that big around. A horse cannot form a mouth seal around that. It's simply too big for them to get their mouth closed. Horses do not breathe through their mouth. There shouldn't be airflow going in there, so I guarantee you if a horse can't close his mouth, that's going to agitate him. So we talked about the bit basics. The diameter of the bit's pretty important, both from a surface area standpoint, and that smaller bits are more severe, but bigger bits on the other end of the scale prohibit the horse from being able to close his mouth and seal his mouth the way he would want to, or the way that you or I would want to. That's a pretty big deal. Again, I kind of get into some of this in another video, and I am trying to trim this one down on time, so I'll just link to the other video where I talk about that stuff. One of the other things that I will say just really quickly is that we would want the horse to pack the bit. He's going to be sucking on it a little bit, like I just said. He's going to be kind of holding it with his lips and the corners of his mouth and his tongue. And what we tend to see in the bit world, they are marketing to you. And what you want to see when you buy a bit is smooth and shiny. Ooh, it's so pretty. It's new, it's shiny. I must have it. The reality is that shiny is slick. And when a horse is trying to hold a bit, he's doing that with the corners of his mouth, his lips, and his tongue. And those things all involve muscles. And just as you or I would have a difficult time holding on to something that's slick, if you in fact get a bit that isn't so shiny, it's one of the reasons sweet iron is such a good choice, because it rusts. The rust has texture, and it is now much easier for the horse to hold the bit without having to use its muscles so much. And so we do see sometimes horses that have no problem for the first 30 minutes of the lesson. They have a nice passive mouth, but when we get 45 minutes into the lesson, now they're starting to open their mouth and work it a little bit and showing some discomfort or anxiety, or that something's not good there. That's a lot of time what the problem is, that they're having, their mouth has gotten tired of holding the bit. Now they're looking for different ways to do it, and it's kind of frustrating. So that's not a problem with bits in and of itself. It's a problem with this slick and shiny thing that it's like holding on to a greased pig, and they've gotten fatigued. They can't hold it anymore. So with regard, again, the mouth seal, one of the things that I'll hear, and it drives me crazy when I hear it, is that a frothy mouth is a good mouth. And this will come from dressage, and man, we see it all the time. When I'm looking for pictures on the internet, like for blogs or things about mouth vices specifically, I add the keyword dressage, because it's one of the places where you see that stuff most readily, which is unfortunate, because one of the fundamental tenets of dressage is supposed to be acceptance of the bit, and that seems to have been thrown by the wayside in the last 20 years or so. When you look at videos of dressage like Nuno Oliveira and stuff from the 50s and 60s, you do not see horses behind the vertical. You do not see horses with frothy mouths. You do not see bit vices. You see horses that are accepting of the bit, that are showing clear comfort in their body language and all. And that is unfortunately a rarity in today's dressage world. So the froth, what it actually tells me, again, that literal thing, it tells me, first of all, that the horse is not swallowing. Again, if I were standing here on camera and you looked at me and I had drool coming down, that tells you that I'm not swallowing. If I'm swallowing, then the saliva has a place to go. It doesn't leak out. If I see froth specifically, that also tells me that air is being incorporated into the saliva, and that's why it becomes a white froth or foam. You could think of that like whipping egg whites with a whisk to make a meringue or something. It takes a lot of work to agitate that enough to turn it into a froth or a foam. So if I'm seeing a horse with a frothy, foamy mouth, that tells me that the rider is regularly and habitually breaking that horse's mouth seal, which is incorporating air into the saliva. It also tells me that the horse has a locked jaw and tongue because they aren't swallowing. And again, if they have a tongue that isn't relaxed and a jaw that isn't relaxed, I guarantee you that their poll is stiff, and so is their neck, and it's transmitting throughout the horse. And that again is completely contrary to the tenets of dressage, of acceptance of the bit and development of the natural gaits of the horse. When you're adding tension to that equation, you're taking away from the natural gait of the horse. You're not adding to it. And comfort should be priority one with all of this stuff. When we see horses that have holes in their foundation, that generally comes from lack of comfort. I could give you 1,000 examples of that. But let's take trailer loading. We have a horse that barrels out of the trailer when we go to open the gate and all. Those horses tend to load very quickly, and we tend to think they have no problem loading. In fact, they have a lot of anxiety about getting in the trailer, and it just stays bottled up, and it comes overflowing. It's like shaking up a Coke, and then you pop the top. That's the opening of the gate, and they explode outward. A lot of these dressage, it's not at all uncommon if we're to, and I'm not trying to harpoon dressage here. I'm just showing you examples that are easy to see. But I mean, every time the Olympics come around, these real high-level international events, you get to your top horses, your last group of 20 or whatever in the finals. 2 of them are going to have a freak out rear up session in the arena. They're skipping comfort. They're pushing to get to that level, and they're missing some of the basic fundamental things that they're not supposed to. So if we were to think about like a human athlete, let's say a baseball pitcher pitching a no-hitter, they're not going to look nervous or anxious. They're going to be in the zone, and things are going to be happening readily and easily for them, and they're going to be in a very relaxed state when they're in the zone. If you are in a tense or anxious mode, you are not going to be capable of getting into the zone. It just does not work that way. Check my time again. Okay, I'm getting a little long here. I'm sorry. So again, just a frothy mouth is not a good mouth. That is a vice. That is a problem, and that's going to be bit related or hands of the rider related, and something needs to be done about that, in my opinion. So the tongue specifically, again, we've got another video that we've just done on sweet iron and copper inlay and that sort of stuff. I'll put a link in the description. I would highly recommend that you watch that, because it will bring in a lot of the chemistry of the way that the tongue works. But tongue pressure is probably the #1 thing that horses start to avoid when we are having a mouth vice problem or rejection of the bit. And again, this isn't a bit problem. This is a rider's hands problem. The tongue is so sensitive and so wired that most people are not soft enough for the horse to be able to accept the communication. They're too hard, and it's like you're yelling at him all the time. And who would want to put up with that? And so the horse starts withdrawing the tongue, or he starts putting the tongue on top of the bit because he's got to mute you. A horse has a sense of touch 6 times more sensitive than the human. And so I can assure you they need way less pulling on the reins than you think they do. I do a lot of work with this in clinics and stuff when I'm working one-on-one with people in private lessons. When we can be face-to-face, I will hold a rein and show you exactly what I mean here. And even contact, what contact is ideally supposed to be is the rider simply removing the weight of the rein. I could show you with a set of reins, if we were again face to face here, that's like 8 times heavier. Just very mild. Ideal contact is like 8 times heavier than what a horse actually needs to be able to feel from the rein. And most people are pulling way harder on contact than that ideal level. The vast majority of them are. And that's really where these problems with bits come from. And when people see success with a bitless bridle, what they have done is they have taken those communication points and they've put them on a much less sensitive part of the horse, the nose. And hopefully, if you've seen the physiology, you understand that lowdown on the nose is a big deal. But what the bitless bridle thing, when we see success there, and I'm not against bitless bridles at all, but that's what we have really done is we have muted the rider's hands. I would rather fix your hands, and then you can ride with anything, and you're going to be able to ride just about any horse, and they're going to love you. If you have terrible hands, you have terrible hands. It doesn't matter what is on the other end of those reins. You still have terrible hands. That's the real problem that needs to be addressed. I don't have any problem riding just about any horse you can find with a bit that has no tongue relief whatsoever, and that is because I have gone through the fire and done the work to improve my hands and the way that I communicate with horses. I definitely consider riding with contact to be an advanced skill. It's not something that someone needs to learn in their first year of riding at all. I guarantee you are setting them and their horse up for problems if you're trying to teach them a skill as technical and advanced as contact should be that early on. That's where we tend to get these problems from, is that we push a rider's skill way faster than it needs to be pushed, and we wind up with holes in their foundation, and their horse winds up paying the price. And it isn't a bit problem, it's a rider's hands problem. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad here, okay? We all mess up some horses as we're learning how to ride. There's just no other way to do it. You kind of have to go through the fire. But if I really question any rider that I see that wants to take a really green horse into contact in just a few days, big red flag for me. And there are some world famous ones that do it that way. Still a big red flag for me. When I see a rider that doesn't have a really good independent seat, a really good one, I mean an intermediate level rider at least, and they're riding with contact, big red flag for me. They're balancing off the horse's mouth, and if they wind up with a horse that doesn't have mouth issues, that's simply because they happen to have a very tolerant horse. If you gave them a pretty nice sensitive horse, there'd be problems immediately. So tongue pressure is the number one thing that we're going to see them start to avoid. It is very, 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 very common. It is almost always rider error. That is actually when we get into, and I'm going to wrap this up now, but Dr. Cook and all of that stuff that started the bitless revolution, that's kind of my problem with it. And I'm familiar with the research they did. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of that, but the fundamental basis for all of the research behind Dr. Cook's stuff was based on the poorest horsemanship that one can find. If you don't have poor horsemanship, none of the conclusions that they were able to draw through that research of the soft palate and changing the airflow, all of that stuff, none of it is valid unless very poor horsemanship is involved. And that's been my whole problem with all that. So the battery died on me there. I apologize for that. We've got a little charge in it now. But I just did want to say, with the Dr. Cook's stuff, I mean, I'm not saying that his research wasn't valid, but again, there is it's all predicated on incredibly poor horsemanship. Almost all of that research was done on racehorses, which are in a very specific environment and are being pushed to an extreme exercise-wise, and they're ridden in a very specific way. And again, my very first riding job was racehorses. I have gone millions of miles around it. Well, not millions of miles. I've done many laps around a track. I did that for months and months, almost a year. I know the racing world. I know how that happens. I know how they use their hands. And you know, no one else should be in a situation like that. And so the conclusions that are drawn off of that world do not apply to the rest of us. Hopefully that's enough information on signs of a good mouth and signs of a bad mouth and some of the things that we can do to adjust it and change, and hope that helps you out. It's Daniel Dauphin with Dauphin Horsemanship. Thanks and have a blessed day.